Hello and welcome to this video for today, whether you're here for the first time or you're returning. Hope you will enjoy. Hey there guys, how's it going? Hope it's all going well for you. Today, having a bit of a discussion about staying on theme. This is a big thing when you're building your commander decks. You want to stay on theme now, no matter what that theme is. You always have a theme, you always have an idea, whatever it is. Again, maybe your theme is, you know, beast tribal or turtle tribal or whatever it is. Still, I would consider tribal to be a theme. Any tribe is a theme. Whatever tribe you are going for is your theme, essentially, again. So, again, if you say, okay, I want to build an enchantments deck, you're still going to have creatures and whatnot in that deck, but they're all going to work with enchantments for the most part, and most of your cards are going to be focused on enchantments. Now, whether that's auras or actual, like, more global, quote unquote, enchantments or whatever, more enchantments that help your board out specifically, whatnot, mana doublers, things like this, whatnot, card draw engines, things like that, you're still going to have other cards that are in your deck. But for the most part, again, whatever your deck is, if your deck is an artifacts deck, okay, well, what kind of artifacts deck? Because there's lots of different artifacts deck, the same as I sort of said with enchantments. There's auras and whatnot. With artifacts, there's artifact creatures, there's enchantment creatures, things like this, as I sort of say. So there's all kinds of little things. Are you, what are you doing with these artifacts? Are you trying to, make them into creatures by animating them with some weird and wonderful effects or whatnot? Are you trying to, turn them into mana rocks? Are you trying to, mill your artifacts to, pull them back out of the graveyard for some reason? Are you trying to make tokens with them? Are you trying to, what are you trying to do with them? Like, are you just having creatures that happen to also be artifacts or whatever? Again, same thing. Like, as I say, in those decks, you're still going to have some creatures, and some of your creatures might be artifacts as well, but you're also going to have payoffs and whatnot that are also something else, perhaps a planeswalker or an enchantment or a creature that aren't actually directly on your game plan. But for the most part, again, you want to stay to on-theme stuff. So you want stuff that works with the thing that you most want to be doing. So this is also like quote-unquote side tangents to what your deck is doing. What is your deck doing? You have to ask yourself that question constantly, and sometimes it's not absolutely clear and absolutely like this is within, a ball of this is exactly what my deck does. It doesn't do anything else but this, whatever. No, it doesn't, of course, because you still will need ramp, card draw, removal, and board wipes and whatnot. So those things don't really fit a lot of the time into any one thing for the most part, unless some of those things happen to be on the permanent or type or whatnot that you're playing. Again, Spellslinger, same thing. Like, in Spellslinger, you want most of your stuff to be instant and sorcery related. Yeah, sure, you're going to have a couple of creatures, a couple of enchantments, a couple of artifacts or whatnot. Again, especially your commander, but again, like, for the most part, most of your deck is instant and sorceries and ways to take advantage of playing those instant and sorceries. So, you know, when you're building and you're building on theme, you want to take most of the cards that you can that help you out in those strategies so that you are still on theme with what the rest of your deck is doing, because again, you don't want to just take a, vigilance, 2/2 creature. Sure, it's a vigilance 2/2 creature, but it doesn't do anything with what your deck's doing. So just that fact that you've got that nice vigilance 2/2 creature or whatever it is, again, doesn't really mean that much. Oh, sure, I can put something good into a deck and it will fit okay in that deck, like say Verdant Force, which is a fairly decent creature. It is very big, and every single turn you get a sapling. That's pretty good value, and it can work with other things and whatnot. And certainly, if you're in a token deck, it's pretty good. Or if you're in a sapling deck, it's really good. Again, there are some other better cards, but they are worth more money, and that one's fairly cheap. So again, when you're looking at things and you're going, okay, what am I trying to do? Does Verdant Force actually do me anything? Yes, sure, it makes me a token every single turn, but what is my deck doing? My deck is a sacrifice deck. Actually, that's really good for me, because then I have some fodder, these saplings that this creature is making every single turn. Yeah, sure, it's only one, but one is better than none, and I can freely sacrifice them to the ability that I'm doing. I'm a token deck. Okay, well, it's not doing anything for me right now, but once I get back to my turn, I have a whole bunch of tokens that I can utilize to attack, block if I need to. Again, but not on my turn, but again, out of my turn, I can use them to block if I absolutely need to. But as soon as it gets back to my turn, again, I can attack with them. I can do what I want with them, because assumingly I can take advantage of those tokens in other ways or whatnot, or I can buff them, I can make them bigger, I can make them more intimidating, I can do different things with them, whatnot. Whatever it is that I'm doing with those tokens, I have a plan for them. I'm not just randomly making them in those sorts of decks. That's what I mean. A card has to, for the most part, serve a purpose. Yeah, sure, it's just a decent-ish card when you're going, oh, this is a decent-ish card in my deck, and it's just okay, well, it just so happens to be there, but is it on any kind of plan? And maybe that's okay if you're just my deck is a Gruul Stompy deck or a Selesnya Stompy deck. All I want to do is get some creatures and turn them sideways, and the more creatures that I can make and turn sideways, the better. Again, that's a fine strategy. That's a strategy that I employ quite a bit. That's mainly, though, a token generating plan for the most part that I employ with those things, because I go, okay, well, if I have this one thing that's a token generator, then I want most of the other stuff that is token generators. And I understand the whole, well, you should run parallel lives and doubling season and these sorts of things because they help your token generation. Well, I just find that they're not that good. They're really good in certain circumstances, but again, when you actually go, well, what's actually going to generate me tokens? Then you start going, well, where can I find room for these other cards that are perhaps very good with those token generators? Without them, they don't really do anything. That's the thing. These cards everyone talks about, and I know how good they are. I understand, but I'm just making this little bit of an argument or whatever to say, when you're on theme or when you're trying to do a thing, these cards that don't do anything by themselves or only work in concert with other things or whatnot, you can find issues with them. And then when you find issues with them, are they actually worth the time and energy and effort and money that you put into those cards? That's the thing that you've got to look at and ask yourself when you look at some of these cards. I have a $100 card here in doubling season, whatever, or parallel lives. I have a $60 card here. Is it actually doing the thing that my deck wants to do? Yes, it is. If my deck is a tokens deck, yes, it helps me make tokens, but does it actually? Like, when you look at it and you go, I play this, nothing happens. My opponent's turn, nothing still happens unless I actually make a token, like somehow, then something happens. But again, without something else, it does nothing. If I have nothing else on the field, yes, and I understand, again, I'm taking this in the worst case scenario, but you've got to look at it like that to a degree. You've got to look at cards as, what is this card in its worst case scenario? Going back to the card I was talking about earlier, worst case scenario, you play it, which is quite a lot of mana. It's, I think it's 9 mana, I think, for that card. So you play it, nothing really happens. Maybe you've got some other stuff happening on that turn, so it doesn't really matter. You've already gone to combat, whatever, or you've already done everything else that you're going to do. This is the last thing you play for turn or whatever. You've got, enough mana to play it. You pass the turn, you get a saproling. Next turn, you get another saproling. Next turn, another saproling. Your turn, you get another saproling. So, in that 4-turn whatever cycle, in that turn around the table, you got 4 saplings. 3 of those saplings can attack or do other things or whatnot, whatever, when you're going to do things. So, you've got additional value by getting these extra tokens. That's not that bad of a situation. You haven't had to invest anything in actively trying to do anything. These tokens and whatnot have just generated under your control because of a card's effect being able to be triggered every single turn, which is a really good effect. So again, when you're looking at a card like that, it seems like, well, that's really good because you get something for free without having to do anything. Yes, sure, the upfront investment is higher to a degree, and again, as I said, there are some less expensive CMC-wise or mana value-wise, whatever, cards, but again, some of those cards are more expensive in terms of dollars. So you can find cards that are good and will generate you things without you having to put in a lot of effort or any effort for the most part. That's again why landfall strategies and whatnot for the most part are a popular strategy, because for the most of the time you're going to play lands in your deck. That's just a natural part of deck building. So lands decks and whatnot, landfall decks, are very easy, simple decks to build because inherently you're going to have lands in your deck and eventually you're going to play lands. That's a natural part of the game. So when you get additional value out of playing those lands off of something, you get a token, you gain a life, each opponent loses a life. Little things like this, yeah, sure, the life gain and perhaps maybe even life loss, unless you're doing it in mass effects, isn't that valuable. But again, that little bit of value is still worth it if that's what your deck is wanting to do and is doing. So just all these little things that generate free value for the most part with what your deck's doing is still pretty good, even if it's not 100% on plan. It's still all right to do some of those things because, it's free value, it's right there, and you're already playing, it's still part of what you're doing to play the game, just naturally. So it doesn't really hurt you to play some of these cards. Plus, eventually, sometimes these cards again are a win condition or a part of a win condition so that you can actually close out the game, because that's another thing that you've got to remember, is that whatever you're doing, no matter what it is, you've got to find a way for that particular strategy to go, okay, I can win now. No matter what way that is, whether you're draining your opponent's life out, whether you're burning your opponent's life away, whether you're milling your opponent's decks away, whether you're, attacking with your creatures, whether you're doing other things, whether you're doing some combination of, burning people with damage, whether you're attacking and draining them from life because you're sacrificing things or whatnot. Whatever you're doing, again, you've got to have, okay, this means that I will kill my opponents and win the game at this point, because, again, I'll go back to that saying that I sort of had, the game's got to end, but that is a very true statement. But it's better when your cards synergize with what your deck's doing, because, again, if I go, okay, I get, in my enchantment deck, I get all my enchantments out of my graveyard onto the battlefield. Because I get all my enchantments out onto the battlefield, that means I make, 40 2/2 cats or something, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But that means that I have all these cats or whatever it is, or I have this specific thing that works in this specific way, or I have, like, whatever his name is, Sir Conrad. Alright, I have 50 creatures in my graveyard. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring all of my creatures back from the graveyard to the battlefield, or whatever. Or I'm going to exile all my creatures, it doesn't matter, because that will mean that all my opponents are going to lose 50 life, and that means that everyone is dead, pretty much, for the most part. That is how I'm winning right here, right now, because that's pretty much my only option. That's how I can win right here, right now, so that means the game is over. So, but anyway, that is one of those things where you've got to understand synergy and strategy and whatnot a little bit. But again, when you look at your deck and say, what does this card again do for what my deck is wanting to do, except for, again, sometimes ramp or card draw, but even then you can find a lot of cards that are on theme, and as long as most of the cards, for the most part, that you can get are on theme for what you're trying to do. It doesn't have to be all of them, but it has to be a fair amount of them so that you can walk away going, okay, well, yes, most of my deck is geared towards this specific thing. In all of my decks, which are mostly creature decks, how many artifacts and enchantments do I run? A very, very small number of them. And same with instant and sorceries. I only run a very small number of them because that's not the plan of those decks. I have Guardian Project in those decks or whatever. That's one of the few enchantments. Because I'm playing such a mass of creatures, that's going to trigger most of the time. But it's one of the very few enchantments in there. Again, most of my deck is weighted for that card to work, so that, why would I run 50 other enchantments? Well, where are my creatures? Unless they're enchantment creatures, unless they're artifact creatures, something else, or whatever it is. But again, as long as they are creatures in one form, if I was saying, okay, I'm playing Guardian Project, but I have a whole bunch of artifacts, that doesn't make any sense unless they're artifact creatures again. But if I'm just playing like all the mana rocks and whatnot, I don't know why I'm playing mana rocks in green, but again, that isn't the point to this at this point. If I'm playing a card that says when I hit players with creatures and I'm playing all artifacts or whatever, well, where are my creatures? Unless, of course, there's some other reason why I have to play, these artifacts in this way or whatnot, and I'm going to turn them into creatures or whatever at some point later on. That's a bit different. But again, like if I'm playing a effect that doesn't seem to work with what I'm mainly doing, then why am I playing like that specific card? Because if I have Guardian Project, again, let's just use that for the example, in an artifact only deck, what's it doing for me? I'm casting all these artifacts and it maybe only triggers when I cast my commander. So why am I like running this card that says you draw a card when you play a creature? It only works with my commander, and that's not really enough for what I'm wanting. So I want a card that says when you play a artifact, draw a card or whatever, or when you sacrifice an artifact, draw a card, or something to that effect whenever you do something with an artifact, draw a card. Like if my deck is using artifacts in a certain way, whatnot, that is the card that I want over something that's, just saying, well, not synergistic with what I'm doing. Again, same with enchantments, same with, whatever. There are a few generic cards, like Harmonize. That's a really generic card, just draw 4 or whatever, draw 3 for 4. I wouldn't really run cards that are just generic. I would rather run cards that have specific synergy. Even if you go, well, removal is a thing. Yes, dies to removal, but sure, that happens, but you want to be planning, not a quote-unquote for the fairy tale dreamland, but you want to be playing as if your deck is actually going to work and do what it wants to do. For the most part, you don't want to play with the ifs and buts and candies and nuts sort of thing. You want to go, even though that, if my deck does what it wants to do, is kind of a thing, but again, you want to play as if your deck is going to do what it is going to do, because it is going to do what it is going to do for the most part. So not playing for removal doesn't really make any sense. Like, again, removal exists, but again, you should be able to work around that for the most part and not have to worry about it. You should plan for the future again, sort of more so, and say, okay, well, it didn't happen this time, but, next time, when I play a whole bunch of my stuff out onto the field, maybe they won't have the Wrath again or the removal again, because, again, most people and most players will only run a certain number of cards that remove stuff from the board. So you're going to be pretty safe when you do those sorts of things for the most part. And again, when the game sort of doesn't progress, that's when the game gets boring. And most players don't want to destroy everything on the field because, again, they've got something invested on the field for the most part. So they don't want to just remove things because they'll remove their own things as well. So you do have to remember that it will also set them back. It won't just set you back. And once they've taken their turn, if that was the thing that they did for their turn, or they didn't do anything else or very much of anything else from after that, removing everything or removing of the one thing or whatever, if you're after them, you get to take advantage of having mana and having the ability to play things after them. Now, sure, they get to, again, perhaps do the same thing again, but does that really get them anywhere? They're better off most of the time to try to get ahead of you or whatnot for for the most part. So you being in the turn order after them, means that you'll be able to take advantage of a clearer board state from what they've done. But anyway, that is what I have to say about, sticking to theme. I know I get a little bit off theme with everything, but there you go. If you're on a theme, you want to stick to it for the most part and pick cards that work with that theme. And then, you do want some generic cards, but you don't want too generic cards, because they're not, going to be, impactful enough for what you're doing. So run cards that just sort of synergize a little bit more with the overall sort of plan of what your deck is doing. But anyway, guys, hope you have found this video informative and interesting. And if you have, I'll hope to see you in the next one. If you would like to further support the channel, you can go onto our Patreon. You can also get social with us on our Facebook. To follow all the updates, make sure you hit the like button. And on our Discord, to get into it, please leave a comment and I'll send you an invite. All links are in the description. I hope you have enjoyed this video here today, and if you have, please consider liking, sharing and subscribing, and I hope you will come back for another one. See you then.